Many believe that martial arts made a fighter tough and dangerous before the 90s. Meanwhile, professional wrestling did not evoke the same respect. However, these preconceived ideas ended in 1994 with the arrival of Dan Severn, or, as he was nicknamed, the Beast. Thanks to his book, today we know firsthand how he persistently approached the leaders of the UFC, who initially rejected him. They argued that professional wrestling wasn't a martial art. But he persisted until he was given an opportunity, which led him to the UFC 4 tournament, becoming a participant in a historic moment for the sport. It wouldn't be remembered as the night of triumphs. For everyone, it would be the Beast's dark night. In his youth, Dan had been an accomplished wrestler. He is credited with his participation in the Olympic team at the age of just 17, at which point he became a phenomenon in the sport. Unfortunately, his career derailed after suffering a knee injury. Since medicine in the 80s wasn't advanced enough, his problem seemed unsolvable. However, if not for this injury, we might never have witnessed the Beast in the octagon. Let's return to 1994, directly to UFC 4 in Oklahoma. This was a time when MMA didn't exist, and UFC fights were contested without weight categories, following minimal rules. Dan's debut took place against Anthony Macias, a local fighter. Although Macias had become a two-time champion in high school, he appeared inexperienced against Severn. At the start of the fight, Anthony threw punches from a distance while Dan attacked with his legs, taking the fight to the ground. Macias was seen delivering powerful strikes to the neck and back of the head, things that are prohibited in modern MMA.
Severn taking some shots just to get him up. Oh, he's taking a lot of shots to work.
It was evident that Macias wasn't a match for Dan's power, as he was taken down a couple of times within just 1.5 minutes.
It's up too hard. Wow! Oh, that's gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt.
Macias found himself immobilized on the ground. Dan finished him with a rear choke.
All that weight. He's struggling with his hands, and now Severn's got an arm under the chin. There's the choke.
And a tap out, and a very good performance by Severn.
Dan's next opponent was Marcus Bassett, who had demonstrated in his previous fight his ability to take down opponents quickly. He had a reputation for being a tough and cold competitor. However, Dan had already tasted victory in the cage and was prepared to act with greater confidence. Marcus began the fight well, landing a powerful kick to Dan's body. In response, Dan executed an excellent takedown to Marcus's legs, gaining control of the fight. He eventually applied an arm triangle choke, a technique he learned from Japanese professional wrestlers, securing a swift victory over his opponent. What Dan didn't know was that, in the final, he would face the UFC champion. A man with unwavering technique and will, who had conquered all his previous opponents. The Beast entered the octagon confidently, easily taking him down to the ground. Royce prepared to work from his guard position.
Свою победу. Но против Северна это может не быть.
However, he had never faced a fighter of Dan's caliber and strength. Royce tried various submission techniques that had worked for him before, but Severn quickly realized that Royce's defense was masterful and these moves wouldn't work. Royce endured over 15 minutes of torture, with Severn maintaining control on the ground. Refusing to surrender, Royce finally caught Dan in a triangle choke, almost at the 16-minute mark, securing his last victory in the UFC. Dan stated that this fight helped him understand that his opponents would only become stronger. And if a rematch were to happen, he would be more technical. 4 months passed before Dan re-entered the octagon, participating in UFC 5. In his honor, he was nicknamed the Beast's Return. His first fight was against Joe Charles, who started strong but was forcefully pushed by Dan against the cage. Dan used his knees and elbows to strike Joe's head, showing that he had evolved from his previous fights. Joe tried to hold onto the fence, but Dan's brute strength forced him away. Dan ended the fight with a powerful rear choke.
Severn with a big elbow. And there it is, a choke. It's a choke and it's over.
His next encounter was against Oleg Taktarov, who was experiencing his first UFC tournament. From the beginning of the fight, Oleg was cautious. Knowing Dan's wrestling background, he likely intended to work from his guard. However, the beast took hold of Oleg's neck, delivering a knee to his head. Oleg attempted to counter, but the physical strength difference between the two fighters was evident. When Oleg managed to grab Dan's hand, he received direct knee strikes to his head, resulting in a cut. Dan continued dominating on the ground, using strikes to turn Taktarov's face into a mess. At that point, the referee noticed that Oleg was about to give up and decided to stop the fight. Dan earned one of the most impressive victories of his career, and the audience was thrilled by the violent display. But what nobody knew was that these two stars would meet again in an even more brutal battle. The UFC 5 final was held against Dave Benito, a large and strong opponent who was skilled on the ground and known for his powerful strikes. It was clear that it wouldn't be an easy fight, but Severn had his own plan. Benito started by throwing right hooks and powerful uppercuts, while Severn pressed him against the ropes and managed to engage his legs.
Now that's all it's going to be, and you'll see Benito try to give ground.
And again, Severn leading, trying to get the leg. He got the leg of Benito.
Not being able to get hit with anything powerful, but Severn can't really get a punch off.
This allowed Dan to achieve his goal, and Benito was defeated. Severn won his first championship title, despite the initial rejection by the league. In the first round, Dan was supposed to face Patrick Smith, who had been a finalist in UFC 2. However, the medical board didn't allow this fight to take place. Thus, the Beast faced the Polar Bear, the nickname given to Paul Verhoeven's. Despite being a formidable fighter, Verhoeven lost his balance and showed weakness in his guard. Severn easily moved into side control and applied an arm triangle choke. This move resulted in the powerful Paul's defeat in just a minute and a half.
Severn не использует энергии. Сплошные рычаги. Это
Tank Abbott was the kind of fighter whom his opponents knew they had lost to even before the fight began. Despite his intimidating demeanor, he couldn't intimidate the Beast. Dan didn't like Tank's fighting style at all after watching his fights. Tank seemed to dominate the fight with his powerful strikes, but Severn managed to press him against the cage. Using all his experience, Severn denied Tank any chance.
удар коленом по голове. Северн прижимает его к забору восьмиугольника. Это, наверное, самый талантливый и самый могущественный.
The fighter who enjoyed humiliating opponents was now on the receiving end. Severn's strikes were terrifying, controlling the fight and tearing apart his opponent. However, Tank managed to stand up and fight back. Severn had to let him go. Abbott was exhausted and could barely stand, leading to Dan's victory. This showed that respect, technique, and experience could overcome a brute who relied solely on his power.
Не позволяет танку сделать что-нибудь, кроме как просто стоять у забора. Мощный правый. С мнением судей. Послушайте зрителей.
For the final, Dan faced a familiar face. Both Oleg and Dan had endured tough battles before meeting in the octagon once again. Oleg seemed to have saved a lot of energy for this fight. It appeared that the inexperienced MMA fighter from UFC 5 had evolved. At the beginning of the fight, Taktarov took the center of the octagon. While Severn threw punches with his hands, Oleg delivered a low kick. Taktarov continued attacking until Severn threw him backward and began clinching. Oleg attempted a submission move that almost led to Dan's defeat, but the Beast wasn't easy to pacify. Dan managed to escape the hold and landed a punch directly to Oleg's face. However, Taktarov remained focused on grabbing Dan's leg. The Beast began using his head to deliver numerous blows, which Taktarov endured through sheer determination.
Да, это видно. Олег, да, это очевидно попытка провести удушающий прием.
After the fight was paused to check Oleg's cut, they decided to continue. Oleg appeared stronger in the stand-up exchange, but his punches were no longer strong enough to secure victory.
Нельзя сказать, что это будет проигравший. Естественно.
Once again, the fight was taken to the ground. There, Dan continued striking Taktarov until the final bell. It was an incredible 27 minutes of continuous fighting, with Dan in the lead for most of the fight. However, Oleg was given another chance with a 3-minute extension. Taktarov continued to work on his stand-up game, but his strikes were no longer strong enough.
Олег снова поднимет. Посмотрите на этих двоих тактаров.
In the end, Dan maintained his dominance. Those extra 3 minutes didn't help Oleg secure victory. Overall, it was an extremely tough and intense fight. But by decision, victory went to Dan Severn. In his career, the Beast faced many prominent and tough adversaries. With Oleg Taktarov considered his main rival, which of these fights would you like to see repeated?